My boss fired me for taking initiative while they quietly took credit for my work. My name is Alex, and for a long time, I thought that keeping my head down and focusing on delivering results would be enough. That skill, that drive, that initiative was once praised, until the wrong person noticed. It didn't happen overnight. These things never do, they start small. A missed acknowledgement in a meeting. A report you wrote presented without your name on it. But when you're focused on solving problems, you don't stop to audit credit. You assume fairness is the default. I worked in operations at a mid-size firm, not the kind that makes headlines, but big enough that what we did mattered. Efficiency, cost management, systems improvement. That was my arena. I had a knack for spotting bottlenecks before they choked productivity, and I made it my habit to fix them, quietly. No parade, just results. The change began when a new department head came in. I'll just call him the director. He didn't start off hostile. Actually, he was polite, well-spoken, the kind who smiled as if he was always 2 steps ahead of the conversation, the kind of person who knew which names to remember and which ones to pretend to forget. Early on, we had a conversation about processes, about how the company was running. He asked thoughtful questions. I appreciated that. He seemed to actually care about hearing from the ground level, so I shared my observations. Nothing dramatic, just small improvements we could implement. He took notes, then, 2 weeks later, in a cross-functional review meeting, he presented those exact ideas, slide deck and all. Except now, they were his strategic vision. I was surprised, but didn't say anything. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe he just forgot where the ideas came from. Benefit of the doubt. But it kept happening. Improvements I introduced in workflows. The new supplier vetting template I designed on my own time. The onboarding checklist I created after realizing how chaotic the process was for new hires. All of it slowly repackaged, rebranded, and repeated by him. At meetings and executive reports, sometimes even in company newsletters. At first, I was just confused. Then came the disbelief. After that, something worse, silence. The kind you find yourself wrapped in when you're unsure whether speaking up will make you look petty or paranoid. I wasn't naive. I knew how politics worked in offices, but I also believed there had to be a line, somewhere. That line broke the day he pulled me aside and said, "You're doing too much. Stay in your lane. You don't need to solve problems that aren't assigned to you." I didn't react right away, I just nodded. But inside, something hardened. Because what he meant wasn't that I was overstepping. What he meant was that I was making him look like he wasn't necessary. I started keeping records, quietly, dates, documents, emails. Not to retaliate, but to understand, to confirm I wasn't imagining it. I started seeing the pattern. A request would come from him. Vague, sometimes deliberately so. I'd refine it, shape it, make it actionable. The next week, it would reappear in someone else's inbox under his name. Even then, I didn't escalate. I believed results would speak for themselves. They didn't. Then came the final project. A major initiative the company had been delaying for over a year due to cost concerns and logistical complexity. I took it on without being formally asked. I mapped out the entire framework over a weekend, built a working prototype, and sent it to him for review. He replied with a single sentence. "Thanks, this could be useful." That was on a Thursday. On Monday, he presented the framework in a board-facing strategy session, word for word. My diagrams, my annotations, even the same file name, just without my name. That was the moment it changed for me, because that wasn't just politics, that was theft, and not the kind you can pretend didn't happen. I asked to speak with him. He said he was busy. I sent an email summarizing what I had created and attached timestamps. He didn't reply. A week passed. I followed up. Nothing. Then, on a Friday afternoon, HR called me in. It wasn't a performance review. It was a termination meeting. "We're restructuring," they said. "Your role is being phased out." I asked why, calmly. They said I had become disruptive, that I took initiative beyond what was expected, and blurred responsibilities in a way that created confusion. Those were their words, not mine. I asked for examples. They referenced the major project, the one I built on my own time. They said it had created tension in leadership because I didn't go through proper channels. I almost laughed, but I didn't. I realized then that it wasn't about initiative. It was about control. And once I became a threat to that control, once the results no longer needed someone else to present them, I was no longer useful. So I signed the termination papers. No fight, no drama, just a thank you for the opportunity. I cleared my desk and left. But that wasn't the end, because what happened next started quietly, almost too quietly. A former colleague reached out. Just a casual message at first. "Saw the update on LinkedIn, hope you're doing okay." I hadn't posted anything about my termination, but word travels fast in places where reputations matter more than results. We met for coffee that week. Nothing formal, just two people talking shop. But then he said something that made me pause. "You know that rollout the director presented, the big framework? They're saying it was all him, that it came from a strategy session he led with senior management." I didn't flinch, but inside it stung. Not because I needed recognition. I was used to working in the background, but because even now, after I was gone, he was still pretending. Still collecting the reward for work he never lifted a finger to do. The next few weeks were strange. The routine I'd been in for years, gone. My inbox was empty, my calendar was blank, and that silence, it wasn't peaceful, it echoed. I didn't rush into applying for jobs. I needed to understand what had happened. Not just to me, but around me. The way people stayed quiet. The way credit disappeared. The way someone could smile to your face while undermining you behind closed doors, and still get applauded for it. I started writing things down, not as a rant, just to make sense of it. Every project I had built, every decision I had shaped. I documented timelines, who was involved, who said what, who emailed who, and then I began noticing something I hadn't fully seen before. Patterns. He hadn't just done this to me, he had done it to others. There was a junior analyst who redesigned an internal dashboard that saved the company hours of manual reporting. The director praised the tool in a meeting, called it a cross-functional initiative, and promoted someone else entirely who had barely touched the data. There was a mid-level coordinator who streamlined vendor contracts to cut costs by 15%. Her spreadsheet became the department's gold standard. She never got a mention. A month later, she was transferred to a role with no upward track. All of them had taken initiative. All of them had been quietly pushed aside. I started reaching out. Carefully, respectfully, not to expose anything, just to ask questions. Most of them responded with some version of, "Yeah, I noticed that too," or, "I thought maybe I was overreacting." One even said, "Honestly, I didn't want to be next." The fear was real, and I understood it. This wasn't just about one person hoarding credit. It was about a culture that rewarded silence over substance. A system that asked for loyalty, but punished authenticity. I debated whether to do anything about it, whether it was worth the energy. I didn't want revenge. That's not how I'm wired. But I also didn't want to let it fade into memory like it never happened. Then I got a call. An independent consultant had been brought in by the company to evaluate departmental efficiency. Apparently, performance metrics weren't aligning with reported achievements. In other words, what the director was saying in presentations didn't match what the data showed on the ground. They were trying to figure out why. The consultant, someone I had briefly worked with a year prior, asked if I'd be willing to have an off-the-record conversation. Just to provide context, I agreed. We met on a video call. She didn't ask leading questions, just listened. I told her everything, factually, calmly, with documents to support every detail, timelines, email chains, project histories, who contributed what. I wasn't out to burn anyone. I was there to clarify how things unfolded. She thanked me and said, "You're not the first person I've heard this from." That told me more than I expected. A few days later, another former colleague, someone still inside, messaged me. "Whatever you said in that interview, it hit hard. There's talk now, real talk." I didn't know what would come of it. Honestly, I didn't expect anything. Companies don't usually apologize, and people in power rarely face consequences unless there's pressure. But I did feel something I hadn't felt in months: stillness. The kind that comes when you speak the truth, not for attention, but because silence was costing you something deeper than your job, your peace. More weeks passed. I updated my resume, cleaned up my portfolio, and started applying. Slowly, intentionally. I didn't want to end up somewhere that rewarded the same kind of politics. This time, I wanted clarity. Culture over perks, integrity over titles. I wasn't bitter, but I was changed. Then, one morning, I got an email from an unfamiliar address, a senior executive at a firm I respected. She'd heard about my story. From the consultant, it turned out. She asked if I was open to talking. No promises, just a conversation. We met on Zoom later that week. I didn't pitch myself, I just answered her questions, told her what I believed in, what I looked for in a team, how I approached problem solving. At the end of the call, she said, "We need people who see what's broken and fix it without waiting for permission, people who take initiative." And there it was. The exact phrase I had been fired for, now spoken as a compliment. That moment stayed with me. Not because it promised something, but because it reminded me that the problem had never been my work ethic. The problem was who benefited from it. And now, that balance was shifting. We need people who take initiative. Those words echoed long after the call ended. Not because they were new. I'd heard them before, just never in a place where they meant what they claimed to. The irony didn't escape me. I was let go for that very trait, and yet here I was, being considered for a role because of it. It forced me to look at everything I had experienced through a new lens. Not just the job I lost, but the one I was about to step into. After our conversation, she followed up with a message. "I'd like to introduce you to our operations director. We're reviewing how our systems scale as we grow, and your experience could be valuable." I didn't get ahead of myself. I've seen how quickly corporate interest can turn cold. But the tone was different. Director, honest, no sugarcoating. We scheduled the meeting. He was sharp, asked questions that mattered. Not just about what I had done, but why I made certain decisions, how I prioritized, how I handled resistance. At one point, he said, "I'm not worried about what's on your resume. I'm more interested in how you think when no one's looking." That stuck with me. I didn't oversell anything. I just walked him through a few scenarios, things I had navigated, the invisible work that doesn't show up in titles or performance reviews, the kind of contributions that are easy to take credit for if no one's watching. He nodded, took notes, and then he said, "That's what we need, quiet structure, not noise." The next day, I received an offer. It wasn't the highest-paying job I'd ever had, but it came with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Trust, no micromanagement, no political theater, just expectations clearly communicated with room to build. I accepted. My first day was uneventful, and that's exactly what I wanted. No dramatic orientation, no posturing, just a desk, a laptop, a few documents to review. The kind of blank slate I had quietly hoped for. And something strange happened in the first week. I found myself hesitating. I saw inefficiencies right away, broken systems, missed steps, unclear processes. Normally, I would have jumped in, started mapping out improvements, but this time I paused. I wasn't afraid exactly, I was cautious, careful not to step where I wasn't wanted. That's what the old place had done to me. It had rewired my instincts. Initiative used to feel like breathing. Now, it felt like risk. But then, something shifted. During a weekly sync, the director casually mentioned a recurring logistics issue. Nothing urgent, just a backlog problem with vendor feedback loops. I asked a couple questions, not overstepping, just clarifying. He said, "If you've got ideas, put something together. It doesn't have to be formal." So I did. I didn't stay up all night. I didn't try to impress anyone. I just drafted a 3-step fix and sent it over with a short note. An hour later, he replied, "This is exactly what we needed. I'll show it to the team today." No pretense, no delay, just credit, clean and simple. It felt small, but it wasn't. Because in that moment I realized how much of myself I had been holding back. Not just in this new role, but in general. After months of having my ideas stripped for parts, I'd forgotten what it felt like to be valued for thinking. The rollout worked. Vendor feedback delays dropped by almost half. Nothing flashy, no announcement, just better flow. And when the director mentioned it in a team call, he said, "Alex mapped this out last week, great catch." It shouldn't have meant so much, but it did. Recognition, when it's rare, lands heavy. Over the next month, I kept doing what I always did. Not waiting to be asked, just solving what I saw. Not because I wanted attention, because I couldn't work any other way. And this time, something new happened. They noticed. They didn't just praise results. They asked for input, included me in decisions. Gave credit, even when I hadn't asked for it. There were no politics. At least not the kind that corrupted. Just alignment, mutual respect. But the past still lingered. One afternoon, I got a LinkedIn message from someone still at my old company. "You were right," it said. "They're reviewing the director's conduct. Multiple people came forward. Looks like your exit triggered something." I didn't reply right away. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to look away, to not relive any of it. But part of me felt quiet relief. Not joy, not revenge, just resolution. Sometimes you don't need to win, you just need the record set straight. I asked a simple question. "Are you okay?" They replied, "I am now." That was enough. I never saw the official outcome. I wasn't involved in any investigation. But over time, updates trickled in. The director was transitioned out, according to a press release. A new structure was announced, new leadership, new direction. But for me, it wasn't about them anymore. I was rebuilding. Not my resume, my rhythm. Learning to trust my own instincts again. Not flinching when I spotted a problem. Not second-guessing every solution. Not looking over my shoulder when I spoke up. I was slowly reclaiming the part of me that believed initiative wasn't a threat. And somewhere in that process, something finally clicked. Initiative isn't just about doing more. It's about seeing more, risking more, being willing to stand where it's uncertain without waiting for permission. That's what got me fired, and it's also what got me here. Initiative isn't just about doing more. It's about seeing more, risking more, being willing to stand where it's uncertain without waiting for permission. That realization didn't come with a single breakthrough. It came slowly, gradually, in moments that didn't look like victories but felt like clarity. Like when I sat in a meeting with senior staff and suggested we stop using an outdated system that was wasting time. I expected pushback, maybe even silence, but instead the response was simple. That makes sense. Can you lead the transition? No deflection, no ego, just a clear path forward. Or when a colleague asked me to help improve a new hire's onboarding experience. I didn't overthink it. I just put together a better walkthrough, added real context instead of bullet points, and shared it. The next week, it was being used company-wide. My name attached. It wasn't flashy, but it was honest. It reminded me that not every workplace punishes competence. Some depend on it. But even in this healthier environment, I wasn't the same. There were still moments when I caught myself hesitating. Not because I lacked confidence, because I remembered what it had cost me to speak up before. That damage doesn't just disappear. You learn to be careful with your voice. Even when the room is safe, your instinct is to measure it. To test the air before you speak. To anticipate how much is too much and whether you're still within some invisible line. It wasn't about being timid, it was about recovery. Then something happened that reminded me just how far I'd come. A junior analyst, new to the team, reached out with a question, simple enough. But underneath the question, I heard something familiar. Doubt. That quiet uncertainty you carry when you've been told not to ask too many questions. I answered him, but I also asked, "How are things going?" He paused. Then he said, "Honestly, I'm still figuring out what I'm allowed to say out loud." That hit me, because I knew that feeling. I had lived it. So I told him the truth. You're allowed to say what you see. You're allowed to share what you know. Just do it with respect and receipts. He laughed a little, but I could see the weight lift. Not completely, but enough. That moment stayed with me. It reminded me that initiative doesn't just move companies forward. It opens space for others to speak. It makes it safer for the next person to try. And maybe that's why what happened next caught me off guard. About 6 months into the new role, I was asked to co-lead a cross-departmental initiative. Something with real visibility. The kind of project that required not just execution, but diplomacy. My first reaction was hesitation. Not because I couldn't do it, but because I'd done it before and watched someone else take the credit. This time, I said yes. But I did something differently. From day one, I kept everything transparent. Shared files, open feedback, weekly updates even when nothing major had changed. Not out of paranoia, but to build clarity from the start. No ambiguity, no backroom edits. The project moved fast. The goals were aggressive, but achievable. And because people felt included, they gave more. Not because they were told to, because they wanted to. Halfway through, we hit a snag with a vendor. Deadlines shifted. Expectations changed. I flagged the issue, mapped out contingencies, and presented 3 options. After the meeting, a senior stakeholder messaged me. "Appreciate the honesty. Most people would have buried the risk." That's when I knew I wasn't working in fear anymore. I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I wasn't watching someone else reshape my work in real time. I was trusted. When the project wrapped, we exceeded the original KPIs. Margins improved. Turnaround times dropped. And during the final presentation, I watched something I'd never seen before. Each contributor named, each section traced to its source. I didn't have to fight for recognition, it was just given, and that was new. It felt quiet, not triumphant, not loud, just real. After the presentation, the operations director pulled me aside. "That's what initiative looks like when it's supported." I nodded, because I finally understood what it meant to do your best work in a place that values integrity more than ego. But it wasn't just about the job anymore. It was about how I carried myself outside of it. I started mentoring. Informally at first. A few people from my old network reached out, some just starting out, others in the middle of the same storm I had walked through. I didn't give advice. I asked questions. I listened. Because most of the time people already know what's right. They just need to hear that they're not wrong for seeing it. And somewhere in those conversations I stopped seeing what happened to me as a failure. It wasn't. It was exposure. A spotlight on how broken things had been, and how much more there was to protect in places that were still intact. I didn't need to be bitter to stay sharp. I didn't need to carry resentment to stay alert. I just needed to remember what I'd learned and why I wouldn't let it happen again. And then, one evening, I got a message from someone I hadn't heard from in over a year, a former colleague, still at the old company. "I thought you should know. Things have really changed since you left. Not perfect, but better. People speak up more now. The fear's gone." That message was enough. Because in the end it wasn't about the job, or even the credit. It was about the silence I refused to accept, and the one I helped break. It took me a long time to stop seeing what happened as a wound. For months, it was all I could think about. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I didn't know what to do with the unfairness of it. You put your head down, do the work, go the extra mile. You build solutions before you're asked. You keep things moving, you protect the people around you. And still, they find a way to make you the problem. That doesn't just disappear. It lives in your spine for a while. Makes you double-check your words, makes you hesitate before volunteering ideas, makes you ask yourself whether doing the right thing is always worth it. But the truth is, it is. Even when it costs you. Especially when it costs you. That's the part no one prepares you for. How heavy integrity can feel when you're carrying it alone. But eventually, I wasn't alone anymore. The people I met in my new role, they didn't need to be convinced. They recognized effort without needing it to be packaged. They valued honesty without fearing what it would uncover. They saw initiative not as a threat, but as a foundation. And the longer I worked in that space, the more something inside me settled. The panic faded. The doubt softened. The fight I used to carry in my chest gave way to something quieter, conviction. Not every day was smooth, no job is. But the difference was here, I didn't have to look over my shoulder. I didn't need to shrink to survive. One Friday afternoon, almost a year after I started, I was asked to present at a leadership off-site. Not a performance review, not a pitch, just an open talk. What had worked, what hadn't, and where we could do better. I spoke plainly, no polished slides, no sales tactics. I just told the truth, what I'd seen, what I'd learned, what I'd still change. When I finished, one of the senior execs said, "You know what's rare? Someone who doesn't wait for permission to make things better." And there it was again, that same idea, the thing I was fired for, now the thing I was thanked for. Afterward, someone pulled me aside, a colleague I respected. She said, "You know, there's a lot of talk about leadership in this company, but what you're doing, that's it." I didn't know how to respond at first, because I'd spent so long being made to believe that leadership was something granted by title, that it had to be endorsed or approved or bestowed by someone with more power, but it's not. Leadership isn't a title, it's a decision, and I had made mine the day I refused to let someone else define the value of my work. That moment wasn't loud. It didn't come with applause, but it stayed with me. It reminded me that everything I went through, the dismissal, the silence, the discrediting, it didn't break me. It just clarified who I was when no one was looking. Some weeks later, I got another message from that same junior analyst I'd spoken with early on. He'd been promoted, and in his note he wrote, "Thanks for showing me it was okay to ask better questions. You made the place feel more human." That meant more than I can explain, because it wasn't about being right or being remembered. It was about proving, even quietly, that the way you work can shape the space around you, that showing up with your full integrity isn't naive, it's necessary. The old company? I stopped thinking about them eventually. I don't check their updates, I don't wonder who's still there or what they're doing. Not because I'm bitter, but because I'm finally free from needing closure. Sometimes the most satisfying ending isn't watching them fall. It's watching yourself rise, without them. The person they tried to erase, I brought that person with me, smarter, sharper, still taking initiative, still building, still choosing what's right, without waiting for permission. And that's the part they'll never understand.